what was World War II like? I mean, was it when it began? Do you remember sort of?
Everybody was greatly shocked with Pearl Harbor. Really, we were living in a blank space and we didn't know that these things were going to come up. So then I was in a business school in Oklahoma City for a while. And I was there at the time of Pearl Harbor, and there were several other girls that lived where I did, and we all were crying that night because you just instinctively knew that it was trouble and it was going to happen. But all these years, we have lived like most people of our class. Now, your dad asked me the other day, he said, so your father was just a common laborer or something like that. Well, he was. He spent his whole life with a Texas company until I believe he died in 1957. So we went to Ashland from Eau Claire, and then we had a job in Milwaukee for John as a head of the unemployment in Milwaukee, and we stayed there a week and discovered that it was so expensive to live in Milwaukee that we didn't want to change jobs. So we waited, and the next thing that came up that we applied for was in Racine. So John went to Racine and had the unemployment compensation in Racine. And the state would make the employment service guy the boss, then somebody else would run the state, and they'd give John the job of running the office in Eau Claire. So Eau Claire was our place, but Racine, Mother and Dad were living. That's why we were married in Texas, Mother and Dad's house. That's what I was picturing.
What did they think of John?
They liked John. Oh, they liked John, and they would have liked Mohan, because he was nice to their granddaughter. Of course, they only knew Johnny and Edith. They didn't know Mohan. Edith. Miles. They didn't know Miles.
Uh-huh.
But we went to Ashland, and then to Eau Claire, then to Racine. And we stayed in Racine all those years. And I was so worried about going to live with your mother and dad that I didn't know what to do about it. And my last call to them, they were driving in the convertible. And I said, "Are you sure that I can live with you? Are you sure it's okay with Mohan?" And she asked him because he was driving it. He said, "Sure." So I moved in with them, but I was only supposed to live.
Don't worry about that. Well, we can get to this period later. I still like to talk about, though, just what it was like in the 50s and in the 60s, and what is it? Well, actually, I'm curious to know more about Grandpa John. When did he start playing the violin? Did he always play the violin
Yes.
And even when you had met him?
Yes, he played a borrowed one from his teacher for some years. And when my dad died, I bought him the violin that you have,
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
course, that didn't need repair at that time. I bought him that from somebody down in Illinois. I can't remember who. But I bought him that and the travel trailer and the car, which in those days was kind of a van, the car to pull the trailer. But you never saw those things.
That's the trailer, yeah.
Mike rode around in the trailer, but I guess the trailer was, I'm getting ahead of you then if you want the 50s.
Well, just we don't have to talk about the present, but
In the 50s, Edith was born.
what was
And
actually?
you know, I feel so sorry. I remember John's birth and Miles' birth, but I don't remember Edith's.
Why is that?
I don't know. I've always wondered why I don't remember some things, and so well I remember other things.
What year was John born?
47, I think.
So that was right after the war. So you married Grandpa John after the war ended, or during the war?
After the war.
Do you remember the day the war ended? Was there sort of a sense
No,
that
I don't. I probably just passed over it. I was working in the library in those days, the Racine Public Library.
what did people think of the war? What did you know? I mean, it was against Hitler and Germany. Was there a feeling of that?
Well, I still, all these Russians playing tennis, I still have a grudge against the Russians. And I don't know why, but I do not like the Russians. But I didn't form such a dislike for the Germans, although our boys, there were so many of them. I've been to the American cemetery in Germany or France. Must have been in France. So many. I was going to find one boy from Eau Claire, I guess. Yeah, but I never could find his grave. But I, of course, had half an hour to do it, to see the cemetery and get back in the car. Your mother and I were touring. It's when we went on the boat. And that, of course, was probably we went on the boat touring after 200, so that was too old after Grandpa died, so you don't want to go there, you want to be the 50s.
We can go there, but I just want to talk
And
about.
I don't know much what happened in the 50s. I guess it just flew by.
Well, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s.
Yeah, I guess the 50s just kind of slipped by. And then the 60s, we had Miles, 3 kids, and we lived in the house in Eau Claire. First we lived in an apartment, and then we bought the house from a fellow who worked with John. And we just flew through those years, I guess. All the days of the settling.
What was it like when Uncle John was born? So that was your first child. It was. I guess it must have been an exciting period.
Well, we had a little car that had a crawling back seat. So it was a little car. And we lived with Grandpa and Grandma on 4th Avenue in Eau Claire. And then we moved to a lumberman's house, great big house that 3 families lived in, and we had the top floor. And we took a little boy in to foster, and I took him and Johnny down and put him in the car and shut the door, but it locked. And I couldn't get back to the 2 children in the car till somebody came and jumped the door. So I don't know what else I remember about the 50s. I wasn't really tight with the 50s.
What was, one thing that always struck me about Grandpa John was his sense of humor. His sense of humor, Grandpa John's one thing always struck me about my memories of Grandpa John was his sense of humor. I remember actually one of the striking memories that I have of going to Racine was watching Victor Borge. You remember Victor Borge, the pianist?
Yeah.
I remember watching the videos of him with Grandpa John. I don't know how, I must have been 7 or 8 or something like that. And I just thought they were hilarious. I just remember him laughing, watching those videos. I was struck that he had a great sense of humor.
Grandpa, it was music, music, music. But he also worked to earn a living for us. So life was almost between paycheck and travel money that came the halfway mark, and it's in the month. Not a lot of money. Always waiting for that next check. But his music money was his.
Uh-huh.
And when we lived in that apartment, even before that, I guess, he got $100 a month, and I got $100 a month to spend however we pleased. Of course, his was always on music.
What would he spend money on?
He had accumulated money, and I found over $2,000 in his desk drawer one day. So I went over to a different bank than our family used. I went to a different bank and deposited it in John's name only, and mine, of course. And I suddenly found that they were charging us every month because he didn't have enough money, they thought, in the bank. So I rushed over and took all that money and put it in our money. It was all gone. So we always lived
Month to month?
John, we always lived just like everybody else that we knew. We were all just living, and that's the way it's always been. And then, are you ready for me to get out of 50s?
Sure. You can talk about whatever you want. I just didn't want to get into the present,
Well, the present I just don't know about, and I keep worrying about. After John died, Edith and I had those 3 wonderful trips. And that's where my money went. Most of it was for those trips. because I paid for both of them. And then he just told me that I didn't give her money to spend.
I'll take that part out.
She was just talking. Just talking.
No, it stopped again. Oh no, it's still going.
But we just went from one place to the other here in Michigan, and then we went to Arizona.
What's the biggest change? What's the biggest change you'd say over the past, well, not 100 years because you don't remember when, but between when you were growing up and when you were 20 and.
Well, my biggest change was probably going into the Army, because I had never been away from home. And, well, I had been away from home because I'd been on that at that business school. I was supposed to be learning to type, but I'll tell you, I did not learn to type. Anyway, I don't know, the biggest
change in sort of social life. I mean, you've often commented about the fact that you can talk to people on the iPads or whatever, and it's something which is just. But in terms of how people live between now and when you were growing up.
Well, we didn't know that we didn't have a great deal of money. We were just like everybody else. And Dad got that job, and then he became a pumper. And that was
He became a what?
A pumper.
Pumper.
He made the wells, bring the oil up, pour the oil into the tanks. So he became a pumper, and that's what he always was the rest of his days with the Texas company. But when he first worked for him, I don't know if you can picture it, a very big well, a great big wheel with a belt that went around the little wheel, and you had to walk that big wheel, the big thing, to start the engine. You had to walk that belt to start the engine. And
what do you mean you have to walk it? You have to like turn it around?
Yeah, you walked, and the action of your walking turned the wheel. It started the engine.
You actually had to walk on the
belt.
On the belt. So this is a big belt.
It was in a shed-like thing on top of next to the well. Wells were rigs in those days, always rigs. And his early days in the oil field, Dad was not a pumper. He was a fellow that worked on the wells. And they always climbed the rigs. But they were afraid of fire. So they had heavy gloves, and they would slide down the guy wires. And their wives would meet them over at a big place where they took showers. And they'd all take a shower because they were covered with oil. So that was his early days, and then he was the pumper.
That was in Oklahoma or in Texas?
That was in Texas. The oil field was in Texas.
Right.
That was why he went to Texas, because that's where there were jobs.
And that was in the Panhandle, it was up north, right, in Texas, where you moved?
No, we always lived around the Panhandle of Texas.
Right.
First outside border, and then down toward McLean and Shamrock, but north of them, in a town called Kellerville. And we have been back there, and there's nothing there. There was a great big brick school, elementary school, that was built there when the oil fillers took over the school boards from the farmers. The farmers never would put money on schools, but when the oil fillers got in, they did build schools because Texas was rich and Oklahoma was rich with oil. It's, oil was a really big business. I don't know what else to say about it. Oh, he had 3 wells that he took care of and started that way. And when he quit work, which was 30 years later or whatever, 35 years later, he had probably 20 wells, and all he did was go put a hook on a thing and start the wells. He'd start all the wells, whichever one was going to produce, what did they call it? There was a limit to how much a well could produce. I've forgotten what they called it. But I went to school in Wheeler High School and the other town, not Shamrock, but the other town.
What was high school like? What did you read in high school? What was sort of the? I mean, you know, what in,
I don't remember. I checked the books in and out for the kids, but we first lived west of Borger. I get mixed up on things. We first lived west of Borger, and that's where I first went to school in first grade. And it was a 2-room school, a man and his wife, teachers. And we just didn't learn anything. So next year they put everybody back a year and built a new schoolhouse, 3-room schoolhouse. And that schoolhouse burned down one night before school started, when they were heating the school, setting it up for heating. The thing burned down. And late in the year, August, November or something, they already had another school built. And Johnny and Dad and I purposely went to visit that school. And now it's a big charter school, and kids come there from all over the county to go to school. That was just the beginning of a school that we went to. But high school, we went to, that would have been in the 30s, late 30s.
Late 30s.
We went to Borger and McLean. Borger and McLean to high school.
Were you a good student? Were you a good student?
Well,
Were you a good student?
I don't know. I probably was average like everybody else. I remember one study hall when there was a fellow who has some kind of a disease, I've forgotten what, had a spell in the study hall and scared us all to death.
Do you have any other memories from high school that are stand out?
I guess I did pretty well in high school, particularly in Wheeler. But I graduated from Shamrock. So,
You after high school, you were out for a couple years before the war began.
yeah, and that's when I went to a business school in Oklahoma City.
Okay.
And then the day of the war started, the day I was 21, not the war started. The day I was 21, I joined the Army and I went on train, first train ride to Fort Des Moines, Iowa. And I was supposedly trained there or whatever, to salute or whatever. And I went from Fort Des Moines to Fort Sheridan, north of Chicago, on the train. And we were the first company into the field. There was another company with us, but they went to Boston. Otherwise, we were the first company into the field after the war started.
What do you mean into the field? What do you mean by into the field?
Well, in the wax, the Army wax. We were in the WAAC, Women's Auxiliary something, Army Corps. And one day they paraded us all out on the field, whatever we were doing, raised our hands and put us in the regular army. So I was there when the wax became the part of the regular army. But at that point, I worked in the hospital. And that's where I met John.
Did your brothers go to war?
They weren't old enough.
Oh, you were the oldest.
I was the only one. Johnny was in the, I suppose they'd call it the Korean War, but he was stationed in Berlin.
Oh.
And he went to language school. He already had studied German. And he went to a language school in Washington, D.C. And then he went to this place in Germany. He was in a security group. You had to swear allegiance and so forth, and you were to tell what you were doing. And he was in a security force up on the rubble in downtown Berlin or somewhere in Berlin, on the rubble from the buildings that had been bombed.
Mm-hmm.
But that was the Second World War. Well, I was the Second World War. John was the Korean War or some one of those in the 60s and
But
70s.
he didn't go to Korea, he was just in Germany.
Yeah, I think he would have, the late 60s or 70s, whatever war was on. Johnny was in that. Kenneth was in the Navy and he was in training in Indiana someplace. And then the war was over, so he didn't go to any war service. He went to Colorado.